We're going to take a look at comparing renting and buying one more time. So, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the upfront and closing costs. So, obviously, if I am owning a house, I have the down payment to consider. And usually we have saved up money for that, or maybe we've sold a previous house, and so that gives us some money for that down payment. We also have those closing costs. And we've talked about those as including the appraisals or inspections or legal fees, some of those extra costs when you're buying a house. So then the recurring costs for owning a house, we have talked about mortgage payments. We've talked about insurance. We've talked about property taxes, utilities, and maintenance. Okay. And then there are some special or one-time costs, and I'm just going to throw down a couple examples. So, furniture or furnishings. So, if you have a new house that you're buying and you need some new furniture to fit into the space, that might be something that you need to buy. A lot of times, when people move into new places, they have to renovate it. So, renovations. And then, of course, there's those moving costs. Now, you could even include the moving costs into the upfront and closing costs. Either way is fine. So, when we compare that to the rental, when it comes to those upfront and closing costs of a rental, usually it's just the deposit. And when it comes to a deposit for a rental place, it's usually first and last month's rent. Okay. And then those recurring costs, similar to paying a mortgage payment, we would have a monthly rent payment. So we'd pay rent. We also can have renter's insurance. We can also include laundry if you need to go to a laundromat if you don't have that within the rental. And then utilities. Sometimes utilities are included in rental and sometimes they are not. So, but you don't have to pay property taxes. Usually you don't have to pay maintenance either. So if there's any maintenance that needs to be done, your landlord would have to pay for it. In terms of special or one-time costs, you also could potentially have to pay for furnishings, although some rental units come already furnished, and then you might have those moving costs as well. Okay, so let's now talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both. So, when we talk about owning a home, one of the big advantages is that we can build equity. And what that means is that when I buy a house, I have so much money that I put down. Hopefully, the market goes up in price, and then I sell my house and I actually make money. And so that's what people consider as equity, right? The money that you kind of make. We also could have potential for a rental income. So I could buy a house and then rent it out, which hopefully covers the cost of my mortgage plus some, so I can make a little bit of extra money. You have more creative freedom. And what I mean by that is when you rent a place to stay, you usually can't decorate it the way that you want. So, some places they don't allow you to paint the walls or change certain things about the house. So, but if you own a house, if you want to paint your house, pink or orange or whatever, you have the freedom to do that. Okay. And then sometimes we get that sense of community or belonging when I own a property. So if I own it in a particular neighborhood with other people. The advantages of renting is that there's no responsibility for maintenance and repair. So no responsibility for maintenance and repair. So if something goes wrong, for example, a leaky roof, it's your landlord that would have to arrange to get it fixed and to have it paid for. Um, Another thing with renting is that relocating is easier. Okay, so it's less, I don't want to say less permanent. You can always sell your house, but it's certainly a lot easier to move out and find somewhere new if you have a rental as opposed to trying to sell a house. So relocating is easier. Credit requirements are generally less. So credit requirements, and that's a generalization. That's not always true, but to own a home, you have to have a certain credit score. Bank's not going to give you a big loan if you have difficulties managing debt. And so rental, it's a little bit easier. Another advantage for renting is that sometimes utilities are included. That's always nice, so you don't have to worry about that monthly change every year. And then also, it might be furnished. So, for some of you who are going away to school next year, if you need to rent a place, it's nice to get a spot that already has furniture in it, maybe utilities included, and then you won't want it for a long time. You'll only need it for a couple of years while you're away at school, and so you don't need to buy something, right? Or maybe you want to rent something just in case you don't like it, and then you find somewhere else to go. Okay, let's talk about the disadvantage. So, owning a home, one big disadvantage is that there's potential for financial loss. So, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's write it down. So, potential for financial loss. And so basically, if I buy a house at a certain price and then the housing market changes, and then let's say my house is worth a lot less, then that's a problem because if I go to sell it, then I'm still going to owe the bank that difference in money. So you could actually lose money when you buy a house. That's something to think about. Sometimes it's hard to qualify for a mortgage. Okay, or sometimes you don't have enough money for a down payment, so there can be high upfront costs. And if you don't have that big down payment, you end up paying more in insurance, so it does end up costing you a little bit more, and it's hard to put together that much money for a down payment. So that's a huge disadvantage. A lot of people don't have a big chunk of cash lying around so that they can purchase a house. It takes a while to save up that type of money. For rental, let's talk about some of the disadvantages. Sometimes you have a lack of control over ongoing housing costs. So, as we'll get into a little bit later, the landlord does can raise your rent only a certain percent per year, and so a landlord does have the right to do that. I'm going to write actually housing costs increase. Okay, and that might happen to you. There's limited housing security. I mean, I've certainly heard about all the stories of people living in Toronto where their landlords actually want their tenants to move out so that they can make more money in Airbnbs or something like that. And so they say that they're going to do a big renovation on the unit, the tenant moves out, and then the tenant has difficulty moving back in and has trouble finding a new rental place. Um, I'm going to put under here a disadvantage is um, availability of rentals. And that's one of the things that keeps coming up in Toronto as well, that there's just not a lot of rental availability. And so, therefore, because there's not a lot of availability, it can become expensive. Okay. And in some cases, almost as expensive as a mortgage payment. So then you wonder, should I be putting all this money into rent versus putting it into paying off a loan to own my own house? And that is what gets that's the question that a lot of people tackle. Okay, so those are some of the things to think about when looking at owning versus renting. What you're going to do now is do that second reflection. So it's assignment number, let me just find out here for you. Assignment number 7. So it's the renting versus owning reflection number 2. And you can submit that on our website.